Hello and welcome everyone to No Bullshit Leadership Live. Now, I do have to say, this was a very last minute event that we put together and I was absolutely baffled at how many people wanted to come and see this daggy dad come and speak about leadership. Do you like that? The reason why we're all here is this guy, that guy there. And I just kind of wanted to take this opportunity to embarrass you because I've got a mic in the nicest way possible, Marty. So I think the thing that really gets me is that you are the real deal. And this is what I saw so many years ago. I actually saw you speaking at a conference and I was standing in the back. You'd invited me. And I could just see everyone was hanging on your every word, and you had the charisma to be able to hold the audience and answer any question that they threw up at you with grace under pressure. And it was that moment that I knew, oh, I can make a lot of money out of this guy. No, but in all seriousness, your genius is that you can make complex things really simple. And that's what we need in the world of leadership, because there is so much fluff out there, so many things that sound like they make sense, but then when you go to implement them, you're like, well, actually, that's not natural. I don't actually understand how to do that. So that is your genius. You also really care about our community. So every single person who has had anything to do with Marty will know he will always go the extra step, whether that's waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning for a one-on-one call, spending hours doing one-on-one videos, which I didn't know you were going to, be that into it at first. And now he'll just send like 40, 50 a week, no problem, easy. You've got an unshakable integrity, and that means that every single piece of content that you put out, you think about, okay, how is this going to land with people? How is this going to help them be better leaders and create better organisations that actually deliver value? And you've just got such a dedication to your craft. So I don't know if you guys we've probably spoken about this on the podcast before, but it takes Marty at least 10 hours to come up with the podcast every single week. I don't know many other podcasts that have been going, since 2018, where everything is like thought about, scripted, so much effort and energy, more than any other product we have, is put into this every single week to make sure that our free content is actually going to be able to help people and it makes sense and you can actually take it away that day and implement it. And that dedication to your craft, it is absolutely inspiring. I'm almost finished. The last thing I want to say is that it is an absolute joy to work with you every single day. What we've been able to achieve together and the lives that we've been able to change, it's just like an absolute gift, other than obviously my family, my beautiful stepdaughter Francesca in the background there helping today. But yeah, I'm absolutely just so proud of you and what you're able to do. You've taken everything from your career and you've put it into, simple, easy to understand, powerful concepts, and that everyone in this room has hopefully used or will use moving forward. So Marty, super proud of you and can't wait for today. Let's go into what we're going to cover. So today we're going to hear from Marty in his keynote, Leading for Performance. It's a really good one, guys. Make sure you take notes. That's what your little pads are there for. We're then going to go into a Q&A. So Marty will answer any questions that you guys have. And then we're going to end with a fireside chat without the fire. So basically just a chat. I'm going to go up on stage and ask Marty some questions that have come through from the leaders in our No Bullshit Leadership Club. And without further ado, I would like to introduce to the stage Marty Moore.
Thank you. So great to see all of you. And as Rachel said to me earlier, I know we're besties. I feel like we know each other so well. And this is sort of weird for me because on my side of the microphone, I'm living in an echo chamber. As Em said, it's 10 hours for a podcast episode. I script it, I research it. I do it really, really thoroughly and I record it. And then I go, I wonder what these tens of thousands of people are going to think. It's the weirdest feeling. It truly is. Some of you in the audience are going to know me a little bit, Some of you know me really, really well because you've been listening to the podcast for so long, or you've been part of one of our masterminds. Others have much more recent and direct experience of what I'm just about to do. So Peter, Drew, like you guys have seen me do this before. I'll try not to let you get bored. Peter's there, Drew's just over here somewhere, Drew's there in the front. If they nod off, give them a little elbow, keep them awake. For me, this is like coming home. I was actually brought up in this area of Sydney, and in fact I went to school just around the corner, around the corner in Coogee Bay Road. I won't tell you the number of times I left Selena's in the wee hours of the morning when I was a young lad, but this feels like home to me, and so I'm so glad you could join me here. Today I want to talk about what it takes to lead for performance. And these concepts won't be unfamiliar to many of you, but you get the opportunity to hear me talk about this and then ask me questions about it, which very few people get to do. When the podcast episode ends, then you do what you want with it. But today, you get to drill down deep. So I just encourage you to take this opportunity to drill down when we start going into Q&A in the Fireside chat. I didn't just wake up one day and think that I could lead. In fact, I woke up one day and realised that I couldn't lead. And the impact I was having on the people around me that I was leading was not as positive as it should have been. Now, I had some positives, of course. Everyone does. But there were so many things I was doing wrong, and I realised that I was just losing all this upside. There is so much potential in people that if you know how to tap into it, you can get amazingly different results. Night and day difference in the results you can get if you know how to lead effectively and you can bring out people's best. So this is fairly casual today. I'm going to tell you a few stories, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that I learnt to do and some of the things that are easy enough for you to learn to do as well, but it requires application and dedication and commitment. And for any of you who are really senior in organisations, it takes an incredible amount of tenacity and drive and energy and relentless commitment. Relentless is the only word that I think describes it. And for those of you who've tried to change your organisations and had some measure of success, you will realise and feel that level of relentlessness. And sometimes you think, I'm putting in so much here and I'm not getting much back. But I've just got to keep grinding away until something changes. And then something starts to change and you go, how good is this? And you lean back and you ease off and everyone follows you easing off. So then you've got to double down again and step into the fray and keep going. And this is what leadership's like. And you all know this. Has anyone ever seen one of these, Brad? This is a coal train. Now, I know coal's not popular, but we got lights and air conditioning today, so it's good. That train is carrying about 10,000 tonnes of coal. It's going from a mine in the Bowen Basin in central Queensland to the port at Mackay at Dalrymple Bay. The locomotive and wagons, if you can make out that logo, it's on the locomotive and wagons, that's Horizon. Now, in 2008, I was minding my own business, working for an insurance company, specialising in heavy vehicles. I was having my morning break one day, chatting to one of my colleagues, and my phone rang. And it was my old boss that I used to work for at Mount Isa Mines. Once again, a mining company, mines coal. And she said to me, how are you going? I hadn't spoken to her for 18 months. I said, great, Deb, great to hear from you. How are you? She said, yeah, I'm not bad. I said, what are you doing now? Where are you working? She said, Queensland Rail, please don't hang up. Just like that. Now, not being a Queensland boy born and bred, I didn't really have a sense of the company called Queensland Rail. It was a stodgy old government enterprise that ran the passenger trains around Queensland, southeast Queensland. And what I didn't know was they also had this big freight arm that was doing, heavy bulk commodity haulage, intermodal freight, a whole bunch of other stuff. And she said to me, look, at the moment, no one is using the P word at all. But we might be able to convince the government that we're going to privatise this company through an IPO and take it out to the market. I want you to be part of the team because we've got to turn this into a company that is commercially viable, not just the old government-run thing that it used to be. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone who works in government, but there is a diabolical difference between the speed and the energy and the way you can make decisions in a company where you're less fettered by political intervention. So we started working on it together and one thing led to another. No one wanted this to happen, by the way. The management team wanted it to happen and the board wanted it to happen, but almost no other stakeholders wanted this to happen. There were only two people in the government who wanted it to happen. It was a Labor government, the Premier and the Treasurer. The only two people who wanted it to happen. Everyone else hated it. The unions hated it. The employees hated it. Even the customers hated it. Those big mining companies that we're hauling those trains for, well, they thought they could get a better deal by pressuring government with their politics than they could by competing in an open competitive market. So against all odds, on the 10th of November 2010, we listed this as the second largest IPO in Australia's history. But that's not the interesting part of the story. I'm just warming up. The interesting part of the story happened next. I had been put in the acting CEO chair while everyone took a Christmas break. And what you just saw in that coal train became that. The biggest weather event and floods that Queensland had experienced in decades. And all of our infrastructure in this newly listed company was under 2 metres of water. Do you like the way I can just move seamlessly between like feet and inches and metres? And I'm getting good at this, right? 2 metres of water. And I'm in the CEO's chair. I thought it was Christmas. Well, Christmas in Australia, what happens? Nothing happens. January, nothing happens. You wake up on Australia Day and hope that you've digested all your Christmas pudding. That's where you are. Yet here we are in this catastrophic event and everyone wants to push me to talk to them. So I've got the ASX on the phone saying, tell us what your earnings guidance changes are. I've got the customers saying, when can I run another train? Because this was happening at the background of record high commodities prices. So every tonne they could get through to the port, they wanted to pay for. This thing was catastrophic. And you know what happened? I cruised through it. Do you know why? Because I'd already done the work. I didn't just wake up one day and find myself as chief executive acting in this company where I had to deal with a crisis. I just did the work, just bit by bit. And it started way back when I was a young leader, when I realised how absolutely shit I was at doing this thing called leadership. How my connection with people was completely overshadowed by my need for ego satisfaction of showing that I could do something myself. And because I'd recognised that and thought to myself, yeah, you know, you probably want to get a bit better at this stuff because it could help. And just year after year after year, I just did a few hard things that took me a little bit further forward. So I sort of learned that the antidote to all of this, the path forward, is just through doing the simple things well repetitively. If you can do that, you know, you're going to turn out okay. Doesn't matter where you start from. There's no one in this room that can't be better, including me. And so this is what I tended to focus on. But see, the trouble is today we get so much noise about leadership, so much not very useful noise, so many platitudes, so many cliches, so many oversimplifications, so many bumper sticker slogans about leadership that it's really not that helpful. Let's try a couple out, see how we go. Our people are our greatest asset, productive workers. Don't ever ask your people to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. And if all else fails, fake it until you make it. Who has heard these before? Show of hands. Okay, keep your hand up if when you heard it, you believed it. Anyway, okay, you believed it, right? Okay, let's get serious. Who's actually said this before? Who said one of these things? Okay, all right. You're right on track. You're right on track. So did I. The trouble is, when you boil it down, it's all bullshit. Well, it's just not true. It's just not. And no matter how much we'd like to think it is, it just has no practical application. And it makes us feel motivated and inspired, and we feel good about ourselves because we are noble, humble, great people, and then we go away and we do, nothing. We do absolutely nothing as a result of that. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. We know this. The truth about this is much simpler and it's much more difficult. Leadership's just hard. The hard things are hard. And this is what you deal with every day. And there's no escaping it. The things you have to do to be a good leader are completely counterintuitive. They go against your DNA programming. You have to put yourself in harm's way. You have to put yourself in a position where you may not be liked. You have to make decisions that you'd rather not make. You have to exercise self-restraint in not stepping in and doing something for someone else so that they have the opportunity to grow and develop. And that's not easy. It goes against every instinct. And like I said, we're taught that leaders are humble and leaders are fallible and leaders are transparent. It's just not useful. It's oversimplified. And it reminds me of an old Monty Python clip. Does anyone remember Monty Python? Who's old enough to remember Monty Python? Okay. I shouldn't have said who's old enough because I saw a few people going, oh, I'm not. This old Monty Python clip where they're doing a parody of a children's show. It's called How to Do It. And in this little clip, they're teaching kids how to do these incredibly complex things, right, in very simple terms. So, for example, one of their pieces of guidance is how to split the atom. Another one is how to build a box girder bridge. But my favourite, all time, is how to play the flute. What do you reckon their advice is for how to play the flute? Well, kids, you blow in one end and you move your fingers up and down the outside. Now, that is absolutely true, but it's completely useless. And most of the conventional wisdom on leadership we're hearing today is exactly like that. It's absolutely true, and it is also completely useless. So this is why I put together the No Bullshit Leadership Framework, right? I wanted to put in place some practical tools that you could actually pick up and use to help you to improve what you were doing day to day and to have that impact flow through onto the people around you, whether it's in your teams, your boss, your peers, your families. Em and I had no idea what the impact of this was going to be. So we start with the centre of everything, deliver value. This is the core. If you think that leadership is about anything else, you would probably be mistaken. The only reason you're paid to lead is to do that thing, deliver value. The interesting part is, you've got to work out what value means in your context. I can see the looks on your faces. You heartless capitalist bastard. I didn't know you were going to be like that. But you've got to work out what value means to you. What is value? You've got financial value, of course. No organisation survives if it isn't financially healthy. But you've also got value that can be created through better compliance, so that you reduce the risk of losing your licence to operate. Making your work sites safer for your employees who go there day to day. A lot of ways to create value. But as a leader, your job is to work out, what does value mean to me? In my context, my company, my industry, this point in time, what does value mean? And then go after that. We've got handle conflict. Conflict is one of the most ever-present things in leadership. It's always there. There's no way to avoid it. And if you lead, it will always be there in the background. build resilience. You've got to handle the knocks. Anyone who gets to a certain level in a company or who's built their own business will have a level of resilience. You have to have that. You can't go anywhere without it. So you've got to learn how to handle the knocks and scrapes and disappointments and challenges that are going to come your way. Work at the right level. This is probably one of the things that I see leaders doing poorly, right from that frontline supervisor level all the way up to CEOs of major businesses. They don't feel secure in the people who are working for them, so they have to dip down and get into the detail themselves. If they're not doing it themselves, they don't feel good about it, they don't feel comfortable. And so they've got to be down in their people's work. Stay out of your people's knitting. Who feels as though they work at the right level every day? Quick show of hands. Just me, is it? Okay. Oh no, we've got a couple. Got a couple. It's the one thing that is going to be a constant enemy. Your people will try and drag you down into their decisions. They want the comfort of you supporting their decisions. They don't want to make them by themselves. They want you to be there with them. Joined at the hip, shoulder to shoulder. We're in agreement. Phew. It's not just me then. Marty's got to be equally liable for this if it goes to shit. Then we've got master ambiguity. We live in an ever-increasingly ambiguous world, and AI is not going to make this any simpler for us. So we've got to work out how to navigate this, because if you think about it, at the very top of an organisation at the CEO level, nothing is clear. Nothing is black and white. Nothing is simple. All you have is these thousands of annoying shades of grey that you've got to try and navigate your way through. But on the front line, where you've got people doing the actual work, they need to know, what do I have to do today to be successful? What do I have to do today? What does good look like for me and for my job? How do I do that? So somewhere between the very top, where nothing is certain, and the very bottom, that's got to be translated into something useful. And so part of the key job of a leader is to make sure that that translation goes down. Here's our purpose, here's why we exist, here's our strategy, and here's where you fit in. All the way down the chain. See, if you say it fast enough, it sounds easy, right? Very, very difficult to do. And then we go into execution. Make great decisions and drive accountability. So when I talk about execution, because execution is about getting things done. If you look at most organisations, their strategy's okay. It's not going to be great. And we are developing a program called Strategy Beyond the Theory, because we want to do the same thing for strategy that we've done for leadership. Nice practical stuff that you can apply. But most companies have a plausible strategy, at least. They normally screw it up in execution. They simply can't execute well. Decision making is way too slow, and accountability is spread too thin. So I'm going to talk about some of these things today. Let's start with value. Now, as I said, it's at the centre of everything. The biggest thing about value is you've got to be able to articulate and understand what value is. You've got to understand where it comes from. I'm going to wander. I'm sort of feeling a bit exposed up there. How's that? It's more fun down here with you guys. What is the source of value? How do you isolate it? How do you know where it is, and how do you trace it to an outcome? So I got absolutely single-mindedly fanatical about this thing, right? About being able to say, if I invest resources here, time, money, people, assets, then I've got to see what comes out the back end. If I can't see what comes out the back end, nothing happened. I just wasted resources. I became fixated on this, I've got to tell you. And it made such a difference. It made all the difference in the world. Because I wasn't asking people to do dumb shit. Right? I was just, this is what makes a difference. Do that. Does this make a difference? Of course it does. Explain that to me. You can't explain it, it's not happening. We're not going to do that. Why would we burn our resources doing something that makes no difference? Oh, but this will make our lives easier. Yeah, not good enough. You've got to be able to explain to me and show me and prove to me that we're actually going to get value out of the back end. And this is the way it worked. So, Who would love working for a boss like that? See, no one. But when it happens in the field of play, on the heat of battle, you will see how beneficial it is. Why? Because all of a sudden your workload isn't this big, it's this big, because you're doing the right things. And when you're doing the right things and you're creating more value than you could have otherwise, you're not getting distracted, you're doing the things that matter. And when you're doing the things that matter, do more of it. And that's why, as chief executive of a big company, multi-billion-dollar company, my average working week was maybe 55 hours. Maybe. Sometimes not that much. You know, I know people who are running companies who are doing 80, 90 hours a week every single week. Well, that can't be fun. Well, it might be, but I wouldn't have fun doing it. And so the ability to manage a company and to drive change in a company of that scale, just by making sure that we got rid of anything extraneous, anything that didn't make sense or didn't create value, just didn't get done. But you've got to be very happy to say no. You've got to be very happy to put stuff on the back burner. And you've got to be very comfortable with not doing some stuff. We all do too much for all the right reasons. So what we need to do, once we know what creates value, simplicity and focus. That's it, simplicity and focus. How do you actually get that razor focus on the things that really make a difference? And what I found working in large corporates was that the hardest thing I ever tried to do was to stop the shit that had already started. Once it started, it gets a life of its own. People become emotionally attached to it. There's a line on a spreadsheet somewhere that says this is getting done. It's got money and it's got people. You try stopping that. It's almost impossible. And then when you finally think you've rooted it out and you get down and you find these things that shouldn't be happening, then guess what happens? It goes underground because people don't want to stop doing their work. Because if the work goes away, they might go away. Very, very unpopular stuff. But if you can get that done, everyone's life becomes easier. I just want to take another example to illustrate a principle from the world of professional sport. I don't know if anyone plays the most frustrating game in the world. It's called golf. It's harder than it looks, like leadership. So this guy here is driving off the tee. The object of the exercise here is to hit the ball as far as you can, as straight as you can, and land it on the fairway. Perfect placement for your second shot. Now, the guys who do this for a living, the professionals on the PGA Tour, the ones who are getting paid tens of millions of dollars every year to do this thing, how often do you reckon they land their ball on the fairway? Any guess? How often do they step up to that tee and do what they wanted to do, which is to hit the ball straight and long and land it on the fairway? Any guesses? Darren, I love it when I've got a fan in the audience. A recent podcast said 60%. Well, that was an old figure. It's gone up to 63. No, I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. So about 60% of the time, right? 4 times out of 10, the ball doesn't go where they want it to. Does it matter? Well, not really. You don't have to be perfect. You've got to be consistently excellent. And if you're consistently excellent, you're going to get the ball 320 yards down there and... Sorry? Sorry. You get the ball 290 metres down there and you can play second shot from anywhere. When Tiger Woods was winning everything that was on offer, he was hitting the fairway just a fraction over 50% of the time. Half the time the ball didn't land where he wanted it to. Doesn't matter. Keep going. Move forward. Momentum is way more important than perfection. Let's have a look at another one. Conflict, my favourite. If you are conflict averse, you simply won't enjoy leading people. Every single time you have to step into a conflict situation, you know what's going to happen? You have this little debate with yourself inside your ears. Should I do it? Do I need to do it? Maybe I don't need to do it. What if I don't do it? Will anyone know I didn't do it? You know this conversation. It's your self-talk. And once you get used to it, it happens like that. You're not even aware of it. But you will bargain and negotiate yourself out of a conflict situation to keep yourself safe. Because we put ourselves at risk here. What are we risking when we put ourselves in a conflict situation? What are we risking? From the audience, not a rhetorical question. What are we risking?
Not being liked.
Not being liked. Thanks, Jane. We're risking not being liked. And if we're not liked, well, that's a real problem. We might get cast out from the tribe. And if we're cast out from the tribe and we don't belong, then what happens? Well, nothing. We used to get cold back in the old days, but nothing happens now. So we've got to get over this, right? We've got to get over our need to be liked. I knew that every day when I walked into CS Energy as the chief executive there, at least 5% of the people hated my guts for no apparent reason. Right? Now, there were heaps more that hated me with really good reason. Like I was moving fast and hard on this change, right? So I can understand that. But 5% of people, they were never going to like me. Didn't matter what I did. I could have been the perfect leader, which I never would be. I could have been perfect. Wouldn't have mattered. Wouldn't have made any difference at all. Straw poll. Just walk out of here after this session. Speak to the first 5 people you run into in the street. You're not going to like all of them. Not all of them are going to like you. We call it life. And you can't worry about this. You can't agonise over it. You certainly can't change it. You've got to embrace it and step into it. But it's a really hard thing to do, and it takes this constant mental discipline to do it. But once you get good at it, everything just opens up for you. It's like you've had blinkers on and all of a sudden you can see the whole field. It's amazing. And it's probably the most valuable skill that I developed over time, because it is a skill. But to get that skill, you've got to start. So when you start from ground zero, it's 90% will and 10% skill. The skill's going to come. The challenge is willingly putting yourself into the situation where you can exercise those conflict muscles. Right? You've got to be able to do that. And so as you get better and better and better in conflict situations, as I say, it's only the first 200 or 300 conversations that are difficult. After that, it's a breeze, right? But you've got to, it's just do the reps. Do the reps, do the reps, do the reps, do the reps. You'll get better. One day you wake up and you think, oh, I'm actually pretty good at this and I don't need to think about it anymore. It becomes unconsciously competent. That's where you need to take that thing. And you'll have so much fun because you don't focus on yourself anymore. You're not looking inwardly. You're not worried about your own fear and apprehension. What you're doing is you're thinking, what does this person need to hear right now? How can I best serve this person? What can I do to help them move forward? And it completely changes the way you feel about doing something like that. And this is whether it's a negotiation, whether it's a one-on-one conversation with one of your people, whether you've got to give your boss some bad news. It operates exactly the same way. It's the same muscle set. There are 2 things, though, that make this easier. I can see a lot of you with fear on your faces as we speak. Right? Many of you have already set yourselves well off on this journey, and you're already nailing it. 2 things make a difference. The first is empathy, and the second is trust. There's a lot of talk about empathy these days, and now we're getting some pundits coming in and saying, well, there is such a thing as too much empathy, which I fundamentally disagree with. So empathy is simply understanding other people, being able to put yourself in their shoes to see the world through their eyes. That's what empathy is. What some people mistake is the concept of sympathy. Sympathy's terrible. You're going to get a bad result every time. If you start feeling sorry for people, you will lower the standard, you'll give them concessions you shouldn't make, you'll create all sorts of problems in the team because there'll be a lack of fairness and you drop the standard. Creates all sorts of issues. But empathy, the more you can get, the better. So here's the interesting thing, right? So with empathy, if you have empathy in the hands of a strong leader, it is like rocket fuel. It is so powerful. A strong leader who has empathy and connection with their people. A weak leader is going to let empathy devolve into sympathy, and that's going to be bad. So when people say, is empathy good? Sure, I guess. Depends what else you've got going on. So if you're empathetic and strong, happy days. If you're empathetic and weak, you're going to struggle. We can say that about a heap of other things too, like humility. Is it good to be humble as a leader? I don't know. Maybe. Depends. What else you got going on there? If you're humble and you're decisive, it is powerful, like nothing you'll ever see. But if you're humble and you're indecisive, it's just rubbish. You're going to slow your team down. People will lose confidence in you. Same with fallibility. You know, is it good to be fallible? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is. What else you got going on? If you're fallible and competent, happy days. If you're fallible and incompetent, no one's going to follow you. Seriously. So always try and dig behind what you read on the bumper stickers just to see what else is going on, because that makes all the difference. The other thing that makes this conflict thing work is trust. Now, trust is the foundation that you build your leadership dialogue upon. You can't get anything done if your people don't trust you. It is a prerequisite for leadership success. So what are the sorts of things that create trust in your people? Let's open it up. What are some of the things that create trust? Confidence. Confidence that the leader, okay, my leader might not be perfect, but she knows where she's going. That's confidence. Okay, great. What else we got? Consistency. Yes. Be predictable. Not too predictable, but be predictable. People know what to expect. They don't get blindsided all the time. Honesty. Yep, honesty. Tell the truth. That's not a bad start. What else? Clear expectations. Clear expectations is absolutely critical, because without them, people don't know where they stand. They'll feel insecure. Clear expectations create trust, even if those expectations are very high. And we're going to get back to this. Right, that's a really good start. So with trust and empathy, this softens what would otherwise seem a little bit brutal in the direct conflict situation. So this is why I could speak so directly to my people and not have them freak out and not have them drag me through the Fair Work Commission because I was harassing them or anything else, because I had the foundation of empathy and trust. Here's something that should absolutely liberate you. If your people trust and respect you, there is nothing you can't say to them. So you're not looking to be liked, you're looking to be trusted and respected. And if you get there, it opens up a Pandora's box of conversations you could never have had otherwise. And this is where real performance is forged. In those conversations, eyeball to eyeball, right across the desk from each other, talking about the things that matter. Doesn't get taken personally. It is all about doing the best thing we can for the team and the company. Thanks, mate. I can roll on now. All right. Let's take one more off the rack. Make great decisions. Now, during that time that I told you about earlier, during the 2011 floods when I was acting chief executive at Horizon, I learned a bunch of things about myself. And they were things that I'd sort of dabbled with before, but I realised that I could operate under extreme pressure and it didn't actually faze me that much because, like I said, I'd done the work. But more interestingly, I was making a bunch of decisions fast. And I had support for them, obviously. This wasn't a one-man band. I had a great team around me. But I was able to make decisions really quickly. And what I found out was that those decisions that I made under extreme time pressure, where I didn't own the clock, I couldn't just take as long as I wanted. I had to move fast. When I made those decisions, they were at least as good, if not better, than the decisions I was making when I had all the time in the world. And this happened to me a couple of times during my career where I was under this extreme pressure. And so what I did, eventually I thought, this is sort of working out okay for me. Either I'm really good or I'm doing something unwittingly that is making these decisions pan out. So I went back and I deconstructed the process I was going through. And what I worked out was decision making doesn't have to take a long time. It's got to be methodical. It's got to follow a process. You've got to tick some boxes, but you don't have to take ages doing it. And it led me to the enemy of good decision making, which is inertia, and it happens for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes there's just too much time in between decision making steps. Sometimes, even if you make a really slow decision, people aren't thinking of the long-term and short-term implications. They're just thinking about getting the Band-Aid on. There are all sorts of reasons why decisions aren't made well, and why decisions that could otherwise be good are just too slow. So that's what I deconstructed here in the Make Great Decisions piece. And it takes judgment, right? I thought to myself, what if I could put that time pressure on myself? What if I could put myself in an artificial time constraint where I only gave myself a limited amount of time to make the decision, even though I've actually got all the time in the world, I can take all the time I like. But this takes a little bit of judgment, right? So you've got to know how much data is enough. You've got to know how much analysis is enough. You've got to know how much consultation is enough. And if you can work those things out and be confident to move, you can make decisions really, really quickly. Now remember, for our goal, for example, you do not need to be perfect. You need to be roughly right and you need to be consistently excellent. So what we've worked out is that a decision that's 80% right today is infinitely better than a decision that's 85% right next week. And this in turn is infinitely better than a decision that you think is going to be 90% right next month. And we know that nothing ever gets to 100% right. Nothing ever gets to 100%. Let's have a look at another one. Drive accountability. Accountability is the core of execution excellence. One head to pat, one ass to kick, they both belong to the same person. Now, most organisations don't like to operate like this. People don't like to operate like this. That harsh glare of the spotlight of accountability shining down on you. No one feels really comfortable in that situation. So as a leader, it's really important to make people feel comfortable enough to do that. I went into some companies that were amazing, right? They had incredible cultures. So when I first went into Queensland Rail, for example, before we took it to the IPO, I went up to my executive team and I said, look, I want to know who's accountable for this thing. It looks like it's a big deal. It's one of our biggest projects. And I got, well, I'm doing this bit and Jenny's doing this other bit and Pete's doing this bit over here, and I don't really know who's bringing it all together, but, you know, I feel pretty good about my bit. Seriously, I was apoplectic. I could not nail down a person to a task. And even if they had racy matrices, you know, the responsible, accountable, consulted involved, even if they had those matrices involved, they were so complex, you had no way of working out who was who. And even though there should have been a single point of accountability, some of them said, he's accountable, she's accountable, she's accountable. No, one person, one. Now, I fanatically went after this for 5 years in that company, CS Energy, and at the end of it, I still had executives who worked day to day really closely with me who would leave something and let it slip through the cracks. Where I'd say, who's accountable for this? And I'd have two execs just look at each other. Like, oh, fellas, come on. How many years do we need to do this for? You've got to stay on it. You've got to stay on it because it's not people's natural tendency to take that single point accountability. People are scared by it. Why? Well, they think they're going to be scapegoated. They think you won't treat them fairly if something goes wrong. There's a lot of courage in shared accountability. Well, he can't sack all of us, can he? And so you get this sort of dynamic appearing. But what you really need to make this work is empowerment. And many of you already know this, right? Empowerment is so important. Once people feel as though they have some control, then they start to think a little bit differently about the exercise. So I always say you cannot start with accountability. If you just go in and say, right, you're all going to be accountable now, you, get it done, I've got the blowtorch ready, it's not going to work. But if you say, I want you to have more say in what goes on. I want you to be able to make more of the decisions that are relevant to your work. I want you to have the autonomy to do the things that you think need to be done to do a great job. And it's our job to tell you what a great job looks like. And so with that, what you end up with is a bunch of people who start to feel like they've got a bit of control. Once they've got a bit of control and autonomy, they're much more likely to say, yeah, I can do that. You want me to be accountable? Okay. I can live with that. No problem. So you sort of creep up on it. But it's not easy to do. And sometimes people even will push back on empowerment. And so getting that in place first is absolutely critical to being able to get a good accountability culture. So, how do we bring all this together, right? You can see how those things fit together already. We focus in on the value. We put accountabilities in place that enable us to go after it. We make decisions quickly so that we get momentum, because momentum is worth something. And then we handle conflict. Every day we step into conflict willingly because that's what it takes. And if you can stitch all these things together, it is a recipe for high performance. Don't worry about helping people live their best lives. That's bullshit, we know that. That's not what you're there for. You're there to create value. And if you do it the right way, people are going to love working for you. What we sometimes don't do is we don't challenge our people enough. Now I'm going to talk about this Challenge-Coach-Confront Framework, right? This is the toolkit that you use day to day to make all this happen. We don't challenge our people enough. We don't stretch them. Why don't we stretch our people enough? Because we're... Sorry? They might not like us. We're afraid to stretch them. We don't want to put too much pressure on them. We want to make sure that they're happy at work because, as we know, happy workers are productive workers, right? That's such bullshit. Seriously. You make people happy. Try doubling their salary and giving them Fridays off. That'll start. Sometimes happy workers are just happy workers. Doesn't make them productive. In fact, quite the opposite sometimes. And there's a bunch of case studies out there that show you that doing those short-term sugar hit things to try and make people happy simply doesn't work. They just want more and more and more and become more and more entitled. And every time that happens, performance just sort of drops off the edge. So we've got to understand what long-term, high-impact happiness is. How do you actually give people that satisfaction in their work that makes them keep coming back? Now, the older I get, the less certain I am about practically everything. There's not much I'm certain about. You asked me 10 years ago, I could tell you everything, right? Not now. I'm really unsure about most stuff. But there's one thing that I'm pretty convinced about. All self-esteem comes from achieving difficult things. Full stop. That's it. All self-esteem comes from doing hard things. So your job, if you really want to look after your people, and it's entirely consistent with the performance paradigm, is to help them do hard things. Quick question. Just think about this. If anyone wants to share, please feel free. But when was the last time that you felt absolutely invincible, unstoppable, bulletproof? I will almost guarantee that it was just after you did something hard that you thought you might not be able to do or that scared you. That was when you felt that good last time. And lots of things made you happy. I was happy with the bottle of red we had last night, Em. But that's not going to give you any sort of long-term satisfaction. If you want people to love what they do and be at their best, then that's how you do it. But we're afraid to stretch people. So let's look at how big stretch looks. Does anyone know this guy? His name's Eliud Kipchoge. First human being to cover a marathon distance in under 2 hours. Now look, you don't have to know anything about marathon running to get this, right? He has set the simplest, most compelling, most difficult goal that you could possibly imagine. And when I explain it to you, it doesn't matter whether you've ever run a step, you'll work out what it is, right? He said, I am going to cover the distance of 42 kilometres, 195 metres, in less than 2 hours, 0 minutes and 0 seconds. Now, that was his thing. Now, in my personal opinion, this is a greater achievement than Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile in the 1950s. This is unbelievable, right?
What's your marathon time, Marty?
Well, as Emma asked, what's your marathon time, Marty? So let me just put this into context, right? So the fastest human being to ever do this ran the marathon in about 2 hours. In 1994, Oprah Winfrey ran the Marine Corps Marathon in Arlington, Virginia in the time of 4 hours and 30 minutes. So that puts me at my time of 3 hours and 15 minutes, smack bang in between the fastest human ever and Oprah. That just gives you a bit of context, right? I'm right in between the two. Anyhow, when Kipchoge set this goal, he didn't just get up one morning and say, might have a crack. I'll whack my shorts on and see what happens. He put together a team of experts, psychologists, nutritionists, strength coaches, biological people. He put together this crack team. The guys behind him in the black singlets, you can see out of focus there, they were his pace runners. So they were also elite athletes who ran in 5-kilometre shifts to keep pace for him. When they ran in front of him in a V shape to provide minimum wind drag on Kipchoge. So this is why it's not considered a world record, because it was assisted. And in front of him, he had a lead car. And that lead car was projecting onto the road a laser green light, travelling at exactly the pace he needed to run to break that time. And so if you think about this like something you're trying to do at work with your team, you're the leader. You put that green line on the road for your people. They got to know what you expect from them. And only you can make that clear. And in clarity comes comfort and the ability to perform. So the more clarity you give, the better. And you've got to put good people around your best people. Your best people are pretty good. But sometimes it's like Christmas mixed nuts. You ever go to the grocery store and you see this bag of mixed nuts that you pick up for Christmas? And you look at the photo on the front, there's all these cashews and almonds and Brazil nuts. And on Christmas Day, you open up and put it in the bowl and you go, it's peanuts. Like, seriously, hang on. There's a macadamia. Right, so we sometimes build our teams like Christmas mixed nuts, and it doesn't work really well. So you've got to set the challenge. Now, you know there's this really, really awesome relationship between stress and performance. Yerkes-Dodson law. Some of you may have heard of it. These guys did this research over 100 years ago. And when they looked at the relationship between stress and performance, they found that as you increase stress, performance improves up to a point. Right? If you put too much stress on, it just drops off the edge of the cliff. But if you don't put stress on your people in some way, they'll never reach that peak performance. What you're actually trying to do is find the sweet spot between anxiety and boredom. Right? You want to keep people as close to that as you can all the time. And sure, sometimes they need a bit of a breather. That's why you need to know your people really well and be empathetic and connected so that you can pick those times. But ultimately, you want to stretch people to where they need to be, because that's where they're going to find the magic in what they're doing. The second part of the Challenge-Coach-Confront Framework is, of course, coach. This is the fun bit. This is where you get to be the cheerleader for your people. This is the day-to-day interactions you have with them. This is where you get to say to them, okay, here's what we've agreed that you're going to do. I know it's hard and I'm with you all the way. So I'm going to be available for you. I'm going to explain what it takes to do what we're trying to do here together. And interestingly, you know, for all the complexities and nuances of human interaction, people are pretty simple when you boil it down. People want to know 3 things when they come into work each day. Who wants to recite them for me? No. Many of you know this. What are your expectations of me? How am I performing against those expectations? What does my future hold? Those 3 things. That's it. Who's sitting here now, mentally running through your team, believes that everyone in your team knows those 3 things today? If they did, your team would be different. People get security in knowing where they stand. And you can give them that pretty easily if you just have those conversations. But they're the ones that are most easy to overlook. It's easy because, you know, we've got so many other busy things to do. We've got busy work. We haven't got time to do that. So coaching your people is absolutely critical. And then, yeah, you know, some people aren't going to want to play ball. So sometimes you're going to need to confront them. Now, if you're doing this well, 95% of your time is going to be spent in challenge and coach. 95% of your time. But occasionally, someone's not going to want to come along for the ride. It'd be great if everyone did, but my experience is that just not the case. Not everyone's going to want to come. And I used to even say to my direct reports, look, I'm not the easiest boss to work for, so it depends what you're looking for. If you want to be your best and drive hard and reach your peak performance as a person and grow your career and build something special here, you're going to love working for me. But there are easier jobs. If you want easy, I'm not your guy. You're going to end up hating my guts quickly because I'm not going to let you be mediocre. I'm going to demand more from you than that. And if that's not what you want, we're just not going to get on. So I used to say this to people just like that, just so directly. And of course they'd all say, "Oh no, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm in it with you, mate. Show me how to stretch." And then of course 3 minutes later they're in fetal position in their office. Come on, guys, do you really want to do it? People show themselves very, very quickly in these circumstances, right? And you know, I said that a bit flippantly. I don't mean to be flippant about that sort of stuff because every individual is worthwhile. Every individual has their own choices to make, but let them make their choices and hold them to account for it. It's that simple. And when someone chooses to not perform or not behave, well, that's okay. You're going to be happier somewhere else. Now, if you look at it that way, everything just becomes so clear and so simple, and it works. You just don't want to drop the quality of your team because you can't face the spectre of having to confront someone. This is what happens, right? So in your head, you're going, "Oh, my team's awesome." And you'll be thinking about the best person in your team. "My team's awesome. You know, look at Emma. She's fantastic." And then I've got all these good people and, well, you know, Marty, well, you know, he's just an exception. And, you know, he's been here for 20 years. He knows where the bodies are buried. He runs the footy tipping comp, you know. He's a good guy. So we're going to keep Marty on. So in your head, Marty's an exception. Do you know what everyone else is seeing? They're looking at Marty and going, "Oh, I get it. That's the standard, is it? So I can carry on like Marty and I still get paid every month and I still get to come back Monday because that's the standard." That's the low watermark. And that's where everyone gravitates because they're thinking to themselves, if Marty's okay, I can perform at 40% of my capacity, I'm going to be fine. Like next to him, I'm hitting it out of the park. I'm doing really, really well. And I can cruise. And that's where your team capability goes. The quality of your team is not set by your strongest performer, it's set by your weakest performer. It's the low watermark that people are looking at. So unless you're diligent in bringing people together and saying, "Here's a standard that I'm setting. I don't care whether you're not career-oriented or motivated. I don't care what you do on the weekends. I don't care if you want to take time off in the afternoon. Here's what you need. You need to perform at this level or you're not part of this team. And unless you can be really, really solid around the minimum acceptable standard, you'll have trouble with your teams. So, you know, the whole thing about leadership is that you get to choose. Every day you get to make choices. What are you going to do? What are you going to do well? What are you going to do differently if you want to achieve different results? Because that would be a start. Do something different. And how hard are you going to go yourself in trying to reach some level of excellence for your people and for your company? Because that's what you're paid to do. You've got a duty of care to your people. You've got a duty of care to your employer. And as I said, there's not one person in this room, including me, who can't be a better leader. Every single one of you can. And it's all about just learning and implementing the basic things that make the biggest difference in how people think about leadership. Ultimately, leadership is just about character. So Bill Belichick, famous super coach from the New England Patriots, did I mention the New England Patriots yet? I don't think I have. He said, talent sets the floor, but character sets the ceiling. In this room, there is boundless talent, huge talent in this room. The question is, are you going to make the choice to build your character to make you great? Thanks very much. So I think we're going to do Q&A. Yeah. So anyone who has questions, we've got a roving mic somewhere.
A question probably from both perspectives is an experience that I had a few years ago with an exec of mine. So probably some guidance on what to do when you are on each side of that situation. So there's a certain project that was very important for the company, and then my exec was very focused on it. And he was willing to take 80% of the resources of my team to do the project. And then I had a conversation with him, and he said, yes, this is really important. It's got to be done. I said, okay, that's fine. We'll dedicate the resources. How about that thing? Oh, that's important too. How about the other thing? Oh, yeah, that's important too. And that's where the conversation ended. So basically, I left that without knowing what should I focus on, because everything was important. And he left probably without giving me a sense of priority. So from both perspectives, how can that get better? Because obviously I left and I hate his guts, but I just couldn't do it.
Right, so clearly you struggled to do your job. Is that what I'm... No, I'm only kidding. Your boss is your boss is what we call a Nike boss, right? Just do it. So you've got the just do it bosses who just don't want to hear. They don't want to make things hard for themselves. They don't want to have to answer to people upstairs who they have to give bad news to. So spare a thought for the Nike boss, right? The Nike boss is petrified of saying no, has never learned how to do it, wants to be a yes person, wants to be someone who can, deliver. I'm the can-do guy, right? That's what the Nike boss has got in their head. They don't want to be bored with stuff like it's impossible. They don't want to hear that. And if they're a little bit insecure, that's going to complicate things. So that when you say, hang on a minute, something here has got to give, they will simply say, well, that's not good enough. And then they'll walk away and go, oh, he's a stick in the mud. He's not cooperative. He's not a results-driven person. This is how they rationalise in their own head. So the dynamic is really, really unhealthy. How do you deal with it? Okay, well, like anything, start with data, right? Just remember, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So what we do in Leadership Beyond the Theory is we actually take this 10-step value ranking process and say, okay, here are the steps that you need to go through to work out of all of these things you could be doing, which ones are most important, which ones are going to drive the most value for the business. Given the resources I've been gifted, let's work that out. And so if you can do that, you end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, let's say you've got 8 things, right? And then you're not resourceful anymore, you rule a line under it. And you go to your boss and you say, this is what we're resourced for. You can make some choices about this other stuff, but none of that stuff comes free because it ain't going to get done. And it's not really until they understand that the choice is deliver this stuff brilliantly, right, and capture the value in the highest value things, or the other choice is keep throwing shit on the pile and we'll give it our best crack, but everything's going to get done half-assed. You're going to risk the stuff that's the most important, and it's probably not going to work out well for you. You can't have that conversation without the data. So do the work first to work out what's most valuable in your team and use that. Now, doesn't necessarily mean the conversation's going to go well. It's just going to frustrate them more because now you've got a basis for telling them to piss off. They don't like that, right? So the best way to do that is to say, here's what we can achieve. I'm going to focus my team on these things first and foremost, unless you tell me to drop them, right? So listen to what you're doing here. Unless you tell me to drop them, here's where the focus is going to go. I hate to say it, but you've got to keep the receipts on this stuff. So the email goes back, the attachment, here's what I've told you I can do, here's what I can't do, we're going to pursue this, we'll do our best, but blah, 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 all care, no responsibility, right? So that's the way you do it. Now, sometimes even that doesn't work. So I had a boss once who was a really good boss. He was a really good guy, and he was whip smart. He was really, really bright. And I remember him saying to me once, you know, well, this project is coming in too late. I said, well, it's coming in when it's coming in. And he said, can I give you extra resources? I said, nope, you're just about to start tripping over each other as it is. No resources are going to help. He's gone, well, I need it earlier. I mean, you can't have it earlier. He's gone, no, I need it earlier. It's got to be done by 30 June. I said, well, I don't know what to tell you, Robert. It's not going to be done by 30 June. And he goes, but it has to be. I go, okay, you'll have it on 30 June. And he looked at me and he said, you just told me you couldn't do it by 30 June. I said, well, I can't, but if you want me to tell you I can, shit, I'll tell you I can. I still can't do it. It's not going to change the deadline. But if that's what you want to hear so that I can shut you up, well, let's go for it. You know? By the way, I had a really good relationship with this guy, so I could have that sort of conversation. All of this stuff's got to be contextual, right? So I couldn't go to a boss who I had more separation with and say that exactly. So just remember everything's in context with the relationship. But that worked really, really well. He just nodded and went away, took his medicine, and told the powers that be that they weren't going to get it until the end of August. That was fine. Right? So things like that, you've just got to try so many different techniques to try and get around that. Start with the data and start with a good baseline and foundation for what you're working on and what you want to work on, and that's a good place to start. Go on, Yin.
Thanks, Marty. Right in the beginning, you mentioned leadership is relentless. Just wondering, that's something I face with as well. It's just ongoing, and you need a lot of energy to keep up. Like, what kind of strategies do you employ to keep that energy up to be, that relentlessness of it?
It's a really good question because in my old days, I thought substance abuse was a good idea, and I'm only half kidding. But I used to. Seriously, my high performance coach is there. She'll tell you. But I found that the best thing for me, or that I thought was the best thing for me, was to go home and crack a bottle of red. It says, by the way, nothing stronger than alcohol, guys, just so you know. But I go home and I'd crack a bottle of red and share a bottle of red with my beautiful wife or whatever, and that would be my right. That was my drawing a breath to come down. And then I started to understand how absolutely counterproductive that is. And the effects that it has on you in terms of cortisol production and things like that. It's just increasing the stress in your body. So the things that we think are doing is good aren't necessarily. So it's all going to come back to good habits and space, right? And it's different for everyone. Meditation is great. I'm also a shit meditator as well as a substance abuser, just so you know. But I've been working on meditation so that I actually clear my head and just get everything out of my head and just centre myself. People take ice baths. People do grounding, where they'll go outside. One of my clients in New Zealand, he grounds every morning for 15 minutes. He just goes outside with no shoes on, stands in the grass and watches the sunrise. So, and that to him is a centering thing that really helps him. So whatever it is for you, exercise is always good. That burns off excess energy. It's always a good thing. It stimulates, endorphins and things like that. So exercise is always good. But I suspect that, when I talk about burnout, the real keys for me are do the right things. Don't do the shit that doesn't matter. Do the right things, and that's going to reduce the amount of work that you're dealing with, the number of problems you're dealing with. straight away. So if you can scope that down and make it smaller, happy days. Stop doing other people's stuff for them. Right? So stop interfering with your people's work and getting in and trying to grab control of it, because that's just doubling your workload. And as long as you're doing that, you're not doing your own job. So do that and then hold people accountable. And that will really lift the way you think about your work, because people are going to be doing the things they should be doing. They'll be getting satisfied by achieving difficult things. You won't be working 70, 80 hours a week. You'll be doing something that's fairly normal and still having time to have those outlets that you have, whether it's, Netflix binges, exercise, whatever it is. Questions? Jane?
You've talked about setting the minimum standard a number of times. Is there some guidelines you can give around setting that standard, or is it too variable?
It's extremely variable, Jane.
Yeah.
But I think the number one thing about setting the minimum acceptable standard is you've got to know what you're dealing with. So you've got to look and listen and learn about the people you have. You can't be too countercultural. So if you're in an organisation of weak accountability and no one's held to account, there are no consequences and so forth, it'll be inordinately harder for you to set that minimum acceptable standard, but not impossible. So you've got to work out what you feel as though is a reasonable ask. So when I think of the minimum acceptable standard, I say, what's a reasonable ask? What is it reasonable to say, this person's getting paid this much money a year, what is it reasonable of me to expect from them? And where I set that minimum standard is going to be higher than other people, I know that, but people always have the choice.
So it's kind of like their KPIs, but...
The standard is encapsulated in so many different ways. Have you done your Module 8 work yet?
Nearly.
Nearly, right. So in the...
Halfway through. Okay. It's coming.
The only reason I asked Jane is because in Module 8 I've got the all singing, all dancing performance standard template,
Okay,
which
I
actually
haven't got to that.
which actually says here's what people need, right? They need to understand what you need from them behaviourally. So what are the behavioural standards we expect? You've got to keep up with those. What is a reasonable performance across multiple categories in your job at your level? So for example, the executive team that reported to me in CS Energy, they had a standard that they all had to meet that said, good looks like this: commercial, safety, leadership, management, working at the right level, or working across boundaries. So we actually prescribed what good looked like. And we had descriptions for, okay, if you want to be at full performance in the commercial category, here's the sorts of things I'll be looking for. Here's the sorts of things that I expect from you. And so it gave people a pretty clear idea. And then we'd have, derailers. What are the things that are going to take you, out of your performance zone? And then we had KPIs. What do we want from you this year? 2 or 3 KPIs, nail these. And then we'd have a development plan, which was, okay, how do we take you from where you are to get your next role? What can we do to help you? What experience do you need? What training, what capability do we need to build? What on-the-job assignments can we give you to bring you through? So that all singing, all dancing, I'm not recommending that everyone use that, of course, right? Horses for courses, make it fit for purpose. But that's as big as you would need to run, a multinational $100,000 person enterprise, and it would also be enough to run a startup. But you just scale it down in a startup to make sure it's fit for purpose, so you're not just drowning in paperwork.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. I'd just be interested in hearing you talk a bit about communication down the various layers of the organisation, because the organisation that I lead, the senior team crystal clear on why we're doing what we're doing and what not. We think, yeah, that program's got to go, we're going to shut that down. But then by the time we get down to the people who are most invested in that program, they hear it shutting down and they're like, these people don't know what they're doing, this makes no sense. So just getting that clarity of communication throughout the organisation.
Yeah, really good question, because what often happens is that the communication is crafted at the level the decision is made. And that's most often the case. So for a start, that's got to be clear. And a lot of companies, CEOs, executive teams aren't good at telling stories. This is about storytelling. So I had this experience when I had to shut down a large project that had already sunk 70 million into this renewables project. So we had 70 sunk, and we had a lot of people on the board and in our ownership group who didn't understand sunk cost. So the concept of sunk cost is, doesn't matter how much we spent to date. The only decision we have to look at is, what does this mean going forward? If we take it forward from here and keep investing, is it worthwhile? Are we going to get the return from where we are today? And with that sunk cost, you know, I was badgering in fact, I said to the chairman of CS Energy before I started, can I kill this project? He said, that's going to be hard. I said, well, I won't rest until that's dead, because it is a dead duck, that project. And it took about 2.5, 3 years, but we got it killed. So the problem is, you've got people working on that project, you've got people who believe in renewable energy, and it was a renewables project. It was just never going to work. The technology was bad, the economics were bad, it was awful. So when I crafted the message for the company, I put it in a way that said, here's the story. Here's where we started. Here were the factors in this project getting approved. Here's why it got approved in the first place. Since then, we've learned some stuff because we've been working at trying to implement it. We've learned this, we've learned this, we've learned this. Oh, here's a roadblock. We found this out about the technology. We had to go into litigation with our supplier. And then we did this and we did this, and then we found this. And so it was walking them through the story of all the things that happened. And then we got to the stage where we were presented with a few options. We could keep going and keep investing money, at least an extra 50 million, and we carried most of the risk. Or we could do this, or we could do that. This is why we've decided to kill it. And there wasn't a person in the company that didn't go, yeah, okay, fair enough. I don't agree with it, but fair enough. Right? And that's what you want. You want everyone to be able to see that it's at least not irrational. Now, that was just communication from me. With all these sorts of things, that's got to go down through the layers. So you've got to be able to get that communication set, and it dilutes at every layer. At every layer down, they're just a little bit less understanding of the factors. They have a little less exposure to the process. They have a little less competence in how to communicate. So every layer you go down, it gets harder. But when we did this thing, and when we did any communication, it was a case of, okay, this is going to come from the office of the CEO. It has to be done. Everyone gets the same story, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is, what does this project manager tell the on-site project team? What does this executive tell the operational people who are just trying to work out how to implement this? And so it works its way down, and I used to role play. So I get my executives in and I say, how are you going to explain this? And they go, well, you've already explained it. I've gone, no, I haven't. I've just said from my perspective why the company's done it. How do you explain this to your people in their language so they understand it? And I used to make them walk me through it. And then I'd say, okay, what I've just done with you, you go and do that with your on-site GM. And this started a process where we got used to actually saying, we've got to communicate the story. How do you communicate it in language that your people understand? And still, the communication was shit. But that was as much as we could do to try and push it down. And then you're fighting spot fires, right? You find a spot fire and you go, oh, hang on a minute, these guys are carrying on like pork chops. By the way, I can't say that when I speak in the US, it's good, isn't it? These guys are carrying on like pork chops, let's go down and see what's going on and try and give them some better information, keeping your eye out for the spot fires.
How many mirrors did you have to smash in that project, Marty?
Yeah, we had to smash a lot of mirrors because it was a solar thermal project which had a bunch of mirrors. So I said we're going to put the destruction of the mirrors back until after I finish my CEO tenure, because otherwise I'm up for about 48,000 years of bad luck. So we managed to kick the can down the road. It was good.
You often say that it's easier to rein in a stallion than flog a donkey. I'm very fortunate. I have a team of stallions. They're fantastic. As part of that, they have uncompromising standards. So sometimes that's good. Sometimes it can come out in perfectionism, which obviously when you are a leader of people, perfectionism is probably not something you're looking for. Do you have any tips on how to maybe rein it in a little bit without making them feel like they are compromising their standard?
Great question, Michaela. Yeah, so a couple of things, right? One of the most spoken sentences when I was a corporate executive was the following. Ready? You're going to write this down or you're going to memorise it? It's an easy one, right? That's good enough, keep going. That's good enough, keep going. And so and of course having the opportunity to say this happens in one-on-one territory, right? So I'm having one-on-ones with people They're saying, but I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And well, hang on, that looks like it's slow. Yeah, well, we're trying to get this right and we want this information, blah, blah. That's good enough. Keep going, keep going. You know, don't slow it down just for that. What, you're waiting for someone else to give you their opinion? Keep moving. Don't wait for that. So it's this constant awareness of speed, and I wanted to be unreasonably focused on speed. Not irrationally focused, but unreasonably focused. Because I knew that no one would go faster than my expectations. So I'd set my expectations way out here, knowing that people are going to try and get a bit closer to it. So that's good enough, keep going. I'll tell you another tip that was just awesome. I just sort of stumbled upon it. I had a guy who was a real perfectionist. He's a good guy. And he said to me, well, I'm developing this strategy for this piece in my part of the business, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, when am I going to see it? He said, well, it'll be ready in 3 months. I've got the consultants coming in, they're going to do this and that, and we'll have this ready in 3 months. I said, okay, no worries, 3 months, I can live with that, but guess what? I want to see a draft next Friday, 1 week. I just want to see what you're thinking. I just want to get a rough idea of where you're heading. So I don't care what you bring me, like put it on the back of a beer coaster, I don't care. But we're just going to sit around my whiteboard. I just want to make sure that you're directionally going the right way. And so what that did, and I did this week, like 4 or 5 weeks in a row with this guy about this strategy. It did one really important thing that I wasn't expecting. He got more relaxed about showing me stuff that wasn't fully formed. He just got more relaxed about bringing in a couple of scratchings on an A4 paper and saying to me, well, you know, I was thinking this and I was thinking that, how about we change this? And we'd scribble on the whiteboard and take a photo of that. And yeah, that was how that worked. And so doing that really helped them to get over that mental barrier of, I can't show my boss something that's not fully formed or, you know, at its best standard.
Hi, Marty. You spoke a little bit about accountability and resilience. What about any words of advice around motivating and inspiring teams?
Oh, that's a good question. Rightly or wrongly, my motivational technique was pretty stock standard. Perhaps in retrospect, I should have made it a little bit more tailored for the different teams and circumstances I had, but it was pretty stock standard. It was, here's why we're here. So I would try and link it to purpose, right? Here's why we're here and here's who we're serving. Because of that, we've got a strategy that says X and we're going to do this. And our job is not to question the purpose or the strategy. Our job is to execute brilliantly. So I rallied them around the, you know, execution piece. I rallied them around being, and I know this brings out my deep, dark secrets about my competitive nature, but you know, we want to be the best team in this company. We want to be the best team in our field. We want to be delivering faster, better, more value than anyone else can, because it's going to be great for your careers, it's going to be great for the company, we're going to post the results. And the types of people who are dysfunctional enough to like working for me, that sort of lit them up. But that technique won't work everywhere. And if I had different team compositions as I did in my younger years, I suspect that was probably much less effective for them. Because, you know, particularly, you know, we've got some of our business owners here today who are part of our Business Accelerator program, and they'll be going to themselves, yeah, I've tried that, and I've said, you know, you've got to work harder because I need to make more money, I'm the owner. No one's getting fired up by that, right? And we talk about that sometimes. So different circumstances, different you know, environments require different techniques. I was probably a bit too much of a one-trick pony, but here I am. So it went okay. Thanks for the question. It's a really good one.
Just a question around the minimal acceptable standard. So say you're recalibrating, right? And you bring that in. I guess I'm anticipating a potential complacency in some ways, because that standard's probably maybe somewhere mid-level, right? Around where certain people are and behind where others are. So do you have any tips or ingredients sort of that have to follow that in order to stave off complacency?
You mean if people are above the minimum standard,
yeah,
how to not let them become complacent? Yeah, that's a really good question. I didn't make that clear at all. when you have people in a team like that, the minimum standard says, this is my low watermark and no one drops below that. Right? That's all you use that for. The motivation and stretching happens one-on-one with individuals. So I'm constantly talking to the people who report to me about, you can do better than that. Right? It doesn't matter if they're 10 times the minimum standard. If I know you can do better than that, I'm going to call you out for it. And I say, come on, you can do better than that. Let's go. Like, what are you here for? Let's do it. And that really pushed people through. And this is why leadership is hard and it's so individual, is because you've got to know which individuals can stretch how far. And a lot of it's trial and error. So you start and you go, oh, this person can probably use a bit more. And you put a bit more pressure on them, they just flake. Like almost instantaneously. Whoa, that was too much, sorry. You know, let's wind it back a bit. And other people, you think you're putting a huge load on them and they just lap it up. And you're going, oh, let's give you a bit more next time. And so you're constantly calibrating to see where each individual can go to. And that requires a lot of one-on-one time. It requires a lot of sensitivity to seeing people's changes in mood or performance or joy or energy. Like, you've got to watch out for those things. And if you see someone's energy dropping or their level of joy dropping, you're going, maybe I'm just pushing you a little bit hard. And the last thing you want is to break someone. So you're constantly looking for that, okay, I've got to ratchet this back a little bit. But that's a one-on-one individual thing. Really good question, thank you.
Would you have any practical strategies on when your team's impact is across the entire site? I'm at a coal mine. So my question is around the team's impact. So is there a point where we can practically measure how is our team's impact, or is it optimum? Because you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to do it to a gold standard or over-service your customers.
What function are you putting across the organisation?
So I lead the portfolio for the whole site, but there's a whole delivery team which actually delivers the projects for the entire site.
Oh, right, so your project implementation.
Yep, so
right.
Under the engineering team. So
yeah.
At what point, what is the practical strategy where you would say, your impact is assessed, you've done it, but you don't have to overdo it to a gold standard, because you're actually wasting your energy, or I shouldn't say that, but over-servicing your customers, because we could do something different, better, with our resources.
Yeah, we're in tricky territory here because engineering and a number of disciplines like that are, how long is a piece of string? So you could keep going and still not get a better result. So I like to explain this in terms of the governance process, right? Is anyone accountable for governance here directly as a functional lead? Okay, so if you're accountable for governance, right, here's the problem. You can invest tens of millions of dollars into governance and not cover off every risk and still have problems. Or you can invest $0 into governance and maybe get away with it and not have any problems. So you're constantly looking to make a sensible judgment based on what you know. So when it comes to engineering, I have no idea what the appropriate level of diligence is around anything that you're designing for the site. This is why experts are so essential in these things. So I talk about leadership like, you get this right, everything follows. No, there's still a bunch of work that has to be done from technical experts and domain experts in what the right level of performance is in each of these things. The best way to do what you're asking is to create that tension between operations and engineering. There's a natural tension there that needs to be basically harvested. So what you want is to have operators in there who need to use this, who are saying, it's too slow, it's too complex. And then you've got engineers going, it has to be done this way, otherwise it's not going to work and the asset will fail. So you've got these two conflicting points of view. The best outcomes always occur when you've got constructive tension, that people are fighting for their way of getting things done. And you don't reach middle ground, but the accountable person gets to make an informed choice that everyone thinks, okay, that's reasonable. That's where you want to get to. So I'd say more operational support. Think about how much time and money you've got. So value is going to come in here as well, because you can't do everything and do it well. Yeah. And so make sure that you're focused on the things that are most valuable. Away you go. Bob's your uncle.
Thank you.
I made that sound really easy, but I know it's one of the more difficult things, particularly when you're in a a non-line role, it's very, very difficult to get line leaders to follow suit.
So would you say that an approach to continue selling the problem consistently across, so they see the problem in a shared way rather than trying to put forward solutions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The only rule I know for sure about when you're in a functional support role is that you either have a mandate from the business that says you have to do this because it's critical to the business and we want you to exercise this functional control, or if your internal customers are desperate for it. It's the only two ways you do things. Because a lot of stuff's going to get generated because it seems like a good idea at the time. That's one of those things that doesn't create value. So the organisation is either telling you you have to control this, or the internal customer is saying we really want this. That's how you know which ones to do.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Let's keep going on the topic of tensions. And I'm curious about your experience in boardrooms, in particular aligning your exec team and the board around strategy and risk appetite in particular. There seems to be, often a perspective of boards are risk averse and management wants to take more risks. So how do you kind of navigate that tension point?
A really good question, Christoph, because boards have been forced into a position of being more risk averse, particularly in Australia, but also Europe very much, a little less in the US, but definitely forced to be more risk averse because of the penalties. So directors' liabilities and direct accountability. For example, if an employee is fatally injured, the directors of the company can be held liable for negligence, legally, in New South Wales and Queensland at least. I don't know how far that spreads. So directors absolutely become risk averse. Being able to articulate what the risk is that they're taking is the hardest thing. So most boards that I've come into contact with, please, anyone who has an alternative experience to mine, please put your hand up and tell me, because most of the boards I've come into contact with are quite weak in both strategy and risk. They're good on governance, but they're weak on strategy and risk. They simply don't understand it well enough. And to find a board, and it's reasonable, right? I'm not having a crack at boards. It's reasonable. They don't have enough exposure to the business to really know about it. So they meet once a month for 4 hours or something, right? How are they going to get a real insight into the business except for what the CEO chooses to tell them? So the only defence you have as a director is a CEO who tells the truth. That's it. That's all you got. And most boards find it difficult to articulate what their risk appetite is. And so management is constantly testing it. This is supposed to be resolved in executive compensation. It's generally not. Right? Generally, executives get compensated for not doing the smartest things, either strategically or in a risk-adjusted basis. So it's a real quandary. What I used to do when I was dealing with boards was that I would find the most literate director in terms of whether it was finance and I had to talk finance, whether it was safety, I'd talk safety, whether it was risk, I'd talk risk. I'd find the most literate director and get them on board and have a proper, robust conversation with them, and then let them take it to the rest of the board. Because the rest of the board knew who was who, they knew who was good at different bits, and they would listen more to, an ex-CFO who was saying, well, this is a really good investment because blah, 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 and they've got all their I's dotted and T's crossed, and I'd work through that director to get the outcome. But boards are hard because you get to see them so rarely. You walk in there and you do your dog and pony show once a month, and you've got to be able to build trust really fast. Like really fast. If you want to get anything done, they've got to trust you. And you've got to be able to do that like that. I'm not sure they answered your question, but it was fun. Thanks, Christoph.
We crowdsourced these questions from our No Bullshit Leaders Club. Okay, the first one from Steve. What's your star sign? No, that wasn't it.
You already know the answer to that.
You guys are like, really? What's the biggest ethical dilemma leaders face today, and how should they handle it?
Well, there's a few big ethical dilemmas that have been rolling around for quite some time. The first one is gender equity, which has been rolling around for some time that companies, for the most part, haven't got serious about yet. There's ESG, environment, social and governance, which most companies are pretending to do something about, but not many are actually doing things that are useful other than complying with the local legislation that they have to comply with. And And there's a lot of ethics discussions that go around this that don't go far beyond the requirements of the law. And so for me, it's all pretty clear cut, right? You're either observing the law and the regulations or you're not. It's binary, like observe the law, right? That's what you've got to do. When it comes to more ethical dilemmas, there are so many things we see every day. We see relationships in organisations, romantic relationships, just completely blindsiding boards and executives and causing huge problems inside companies. Every week there's a new CEO sacked for something, for not disclosing a relationship. I can't actually understand that because I think, there's how many people in the world? 8 billion? It's 8 billion people. Like, really? You want to mess with the 20 that you work with? Like, really? But
I met my husband at work.
I know you did, but not at your work. He was working in a different company. But there's those things I think are ethical dilemmas because you end up, they're the thorny ones because you end up with a power imbalance. And when you've got a power imbalance in a relationship, in the work environment, it's not going to end well. It doesn't matter whether it ends well or not, it doesn't end well. Because even if the relationship goes really well, you've got all these other people thinking, well, there's some favouritism. We're not working in a meritocracy, right? So you've got, those things are really important. The less obvious ethical dilemmas are things like, we've got to meet our earnings guidance. And so how creative will we get with our accounts? Now, I used to work for a CEO who was a dead set genius. He could make the numbers sing and didn't stretch it so far that the analysts gave him a red card, but stretched it far enough that we all got our bonuses, which was awesome. But if I look back on it, I go, yeah, I probably wouldn't have done that. I would have played with a straighter bat. And when I was a CEO, I did play with a straighter bat. We set hard targets and occasionally we missed them. In fact, often we missed them because we were setting hard targets. And that was okay. I'd rather be the CEO who's known for doing the right thing by the shareholders than being the CEO who got paid a shit ton of money. So that's an ethical dilemma that we deal with every day. And then, the ethical dilemma of, the new environment, which is we got people doing hybrid work. It's not a level playing field there now. Some people work from home, some people work from work. When I'm promoting someone, who do I promote? I know this person, I don't really know this person. What do I demand from my people now that, expectations of each individual are very, very different? So that's an ethical dilemma that's going to come home to roost. So yeah, there's plenty to work on. Not going to get bored anytime soon. Plenty of ethical dilemmas to play with. So it's probably as far as I need to go on that.
Yeah, I didn't mean to get everyone thinking now about all the ethical dilemmas that are happening in your businesses right now. Okay, what are the common misconceptions about leadership that can undermine effectiveness, and how can leaders address them?
Oh, well, I think the common misconceptions about leadership are all around, the bumper stickers. It's all about, showing yourself to be a virtuous leader as opposed to actually leading well. And that's what I think is probably the biggest problem. So we could be forgiven for thinking that as long as we come in and we give people what they want and we treat them nicely, that's the job of a leader and that's what we're doing. And it's absolutely not the case, as I've just spent a long time telling you. So every week the podcast is to tell you that thing, right? Don't do that because that's not going to get you anywhere. It gets your people nowhere. It gets your company nowhere. So think about this concept of delivering on what I'm paid to deliver.
Nice. This one from Victor. What initial steps would you recommend for raising accountability in an organisation where decisions and actions happen slowly?
Well, speed is really important, but you could probably disconnect that from the whole accountability thing, because accountability is accountability, and if you get that first, you'll find you can increase speed more easily. If the organisation culturally is slow, you'll find that hard to break. And I talk often about not being countercultural. You can't go completely out of bounds. You've got to stay within the reasonable limits of what your company can tolerate. So, for example, when I recommend, getting rid of the donkeys and building up a team of stallions, what actually happens is a lot of companies just don't like that concept. They don't want you to remove anyone because they have a full employment policy or they want, other certain things to be taken into account. So as I say, the way to test this is to make sure that your boss is at least neutral. Right? You don't need their, undying support, and you don't need them in the trenches with you. But if you want to make change in your team, your boss at least has to be neutral so that they don't stop you from doing what you know needs to be done. So build a neutral boss. That's a pretty good start. Did I answer the question? Oh, you probably asked a different question, but that was fun.
No, let's just roll with that. It's people nodding. That's fine.
Good.
This one from Mick. Hey, Mick. When a senior leader's self-interest negatively impacts the team, how can you mitigate these effects? What's the best way to approach a conversation about it?
Probably not calling out the senior leader who's demonstrated self-interest. That's hard, but politically hard to do that. So you certainly wouldn't do anything public. You certainly wouldn't try and impress upon your team that it was a senior leader operating in self-interest. Everyone knows, people can see it. So what you need to do is to get the best of what you've got and execute the best way you possibly can. So if you see a leader acting in self-interest, which by the way should be commonplace, that should be happening every day to you. You should see decisions that are, just laced with self-interest, because that's how most people think about things. We're human, right? We all think about self-interest first, and then we work back from there to try and put some sort of, greater governance on ourselves. So when you see that, I'd say first of all, don't ascribe malice when you can ascribe incompetence. So first of all, incompetence should be your first step. They're probably incompetent. Let's work out why. If not, and you think they're really bright and competent, then they've been exercising self-interest, so you can ascribe malice after that. But the best thing to do is to say to your team, if you don't want them to be completely offside, is, okay, we don't get a call on this one. Once again, another thing I said a lot. Okay, we don't get a call on this one. This is what they have to do. And in my younger days, I would have been pretty terrible. I would have said, these guys are idiots. I don't know what they're getting paid for. They don't know what they... I would have done that right. As I got a little more mature, 2 years ago, I worked out that the most important thing was to say, we don't understand. We don't understand why this decision was made. You can't get inside someone's head and know what their intent was. It's impossible. So it might reek of self-interest, or it might reek of, more commonly, the path of least resistance, which is normally where your decisions are going to go. But if you can't change your boss's idea about what the right decision is, then all you can do, the only tool you've got, is to huddle around the team on execution and say, we didn't get a call, we've got to make this the best we can, because we're in a position to do that. Let's execute brilliantly. And that's what it would be. And that was normally okay. That was normally enough. People would have a bit of a bitch and moan around the water cooler, and then it was done. So, yeah, that's my advice for that. It's not really good advice.
Is that a good answer, Mick? Yeah, good. Okay. Live feedback.
And document it to save your ass.
That's right. Keep the receipts. Yeah.
From Scott, why do some organisations fail to live by their purpose and values, particularly when it comes to ethical treatment of customers and employees? At what level does this commitment to values truly exist, and at what level might it break down?
Okay.
Come on, you've warmed up with all the other ones.
Well, this is a little bit tricky, because as soon as you start talking about ethical treatment of employees and customers, then you're putting some sort of moral filter over the top. So who's the arbiter of this moral filter? Who gets to say whether that treatment is ethical or unethical? I mean, there are obvious things, but most of these things happen in degrees. They don't happen all of a sudden in a big black and white way where you go, that was unethical. Now some things, embezzling money, that'll count. But there's a bunch of other stuff that is simply, I don't know that I would have done it that way. That seems a bit harsh. So when we start talking about, for example, and the reason I love this so much is we can talk about the people before profits paradigm. So this has become so popular, right? You've got these luminaries like Adam Grant, academic, who's a very good guy, but, and I do follow some of his stuff. He's actually very bright, but he'll say stuff and you go, oh, I agreed with you right up until you said this, or, that's exactly true, but it's so easy to misinterpret. I can see all these leaders now out there misinterpreting it. But he did this whole people versus profits. You put people first every time. And some of you may have heard that really old podcast episode I did, which was called something, which was all about people before profits. So I said, when you say people before profits, which people are you talking about? Now, it's sort of designed to target the employee. Put the employees before the company profit. Okay, that's sort of interesting. So you're going to prioritise employees ahead of customers. So let your staff do whatever the hell they want, and your customers will pay a higher price. Is that good? Well, not for your customers. So which people are you talking about? How about your investors? Let's put our employees first, and our investors are going to suck it up on their dividends and their capital growth. And so all of a sudden, they don't want to be investing in the company anymore. Have a little bit of long-sightedness. Look down the road and see if you all still want to be here and employed in 10 years. So the people versus profits thing is extraordinarily complex. And as I said, as soon as you start talking about ethical dilemmas around, customers and employees, you're bringing that value judgment into play, which is hard. However, that's just my preamble. Having said that, the first part of the question, which was, why do some companies fail to live by their purpose and values, is that they're not serious in the first place. They're checking a box. So how many of you know your company values off the top of your head? Quick show of hands. Business owners, Brad, come on. Would you? So some of you know it off the top of your head. Who feels as though, from the top down, your executives, starting at the CEO and board, actually live those values? Anyone? Okay, some do. Okay, right. Are they good values to live by? Okay, so a few of you, that's encouraging. But generally, these things are designed to check a box. We've got to have a purpose and values for our website, and we've got to be able to print them out on glossy brochures and glossy posters and put them around the walls of the office. And that's where it ends. But you don't find out until something hard has to be done. So anyone can sail in a calm sea, right? You don't find out what someone's like until you put pressure on them. And so when the pressure comes on, you see the way people are going to jump. So the pressure comes on from, we're going to miss our earnings guidance. Well, I'll find a way to get this one-off cost out of the P&L so that it looks like we made our numbers. Or, we've got this investment we have to make at one of our sites, and there's a real safety hazard that we've identified as a high risk. We've got to spend $10 million on it. Well, we'll have to kick that can down the road. We can't spend that now. So what's more important? What are you telling your people? Is it the profits for the company, or is it their own safety that they go home at night the way they walked in? So you get the opportunity, which is one of the most fun bits about leadership, you get the opportunity to deal with these issues every day. There's not one issue that's the same. They all come back and they have slightly different nuance to them, which you've got to pick your way through. And that's why it's so much fun.
Marty, I'm particularly loving the Oompa Loompa strain of orange on your face right now. Brad, can we just kick that forward to a blue maybe? Get him
Make No Bullshit leadership great again. Oh, sorry.
Get you a bit more avatar. All right, so let's do the last question.
I'm swapping seats, come on. No, I'm only kidding.
This is my good side. Kate, what experiences inspired you to become a no bullshit leader? Could you share a story that influenced this approach? I'm Kate. I want to know.
I don't know that anything conscious happened on the way through. In fact, I can probably guarantee nothing conscious happened. My drive was just, I got to get better at this. That was it. It was literally that simple. I just got to get better at this. I'm shit at it now. It's not good for my people. It's not good for the team. It's not good for the company. I got to work out how to do this thing. And then I just threw myself into it. So, for example, when I had my first really bad one-on-one conversation, what happens to most people who are a little bit more well-adjusted than I was at the time? They go, that was awful. I'm not doing that again. That was terrible. It was an awful experience for me and for the other person. There's got to be a way to not do that. And I walked out of my first bad meeting like that and I went, that was terrible. I got to get so much better at that. And I just threw myself into those meetings. I did my first 100 in a couple of months. Like I just said, I've got to get good at this. This is fundamental to being able to lead. And so I just tossed myself into it, and I just eventually got more comfortable. That was it.
Do you think that's where people go, I'm not cut out to be a leader?
Probably, yeah.
In those first few conversations?
Yeah, everyone's cut out to be a leader. The problem is you can't teach courage, and you've got to have that bare modicum of, okay, I'm prepared to step in and risk myself to do this thing because I know it's important. That's really where it begins and ends. So I never really had any sort of sense of becoming a no bullshit leader. I always had a very direct style. I always had a very strong affinity with accountability. So that one head to pat, one ass to kick stuff, I didn't work that out last year. Like that's been with me since I was in my early 20s. And
you can imagine growing up in that house was fun.
So much fun, so much fun. So that was more a case of evolution. But some of those things came to my value set that, my parents taught me and that I learned in school, 100 metres up the road in Coogee Bay Road. But other things were developed over time. And it wasn't until we sat down and said, okay, what's in your head? What have you got that might be useful to other leaders? That we started to pull out what the essence of this was. And the essence of it was, you can be quite direct about how to do simple things and it makes a difference. That was it. So we sort of sat around my pool one afternoon in Brisbane and tossed about 100 ideas around and finally came up with No Bullshit Leadership. That was us, done and dusted. And here we are.
And here we are. All right, we should let everyone go. If they want to, we have this room and outside for about another 45 minutes. So if anyone wants to hang around, ask Marty more questions. I know some people have books they want signed, Marty. Got your wrist ready. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We hope you got a whole lot of value out of this. Marty, any parting words for our room of no bullshit leaders?
No, I just want to say thank you very much to everyone for coming. I know how valuable your time is and how busy you are, so it's great that you've been able to come and join us. And I'm going to be hanging around, happy to answer any questions you have. It's our first live event ever in Australia that we've put on, so we're really glad we could do that and hope you got a lot out of it. So thank you very much.